Hi guys, it's Alan and welcome back to a very special Christmas edition of the Library of Alexandria. So today guys, I am going to be reviewing a book as part of the Worldhoppers Secret Santa. So this idea brought forth by Andy Smith. Each of us booktubers, we got ourselves a Secret Santa, and instead of buying a present for that person, we instead chose a book that they had reviewed highly on their Goodreads or their channel, a book that they really enjoyed, and we kept it a secret for the month of December. We read it ourselves and then recorded a vlog or a review, and it's all going to be released at the same time, which is right now, December 21st at 9 a.m. Central Time. And guys, I am delighted to say that my person, it's never your Secret Santa. Your Secret Santa is the person that got you. So I never know who your secret, I don't know, present bearer, your secret recipient? My secret recipient was none other than Lezlie Smith over at The Nerdy Narrative, and I was so excited when I got Lezlie because Lezlie is one of my best friends on BookTube. I have met Lezlie in real life when my wife and I were down in Orlando, and Lezlie is so nice and so amazing. Lezlie and I, we have very similar tastes in a lot of things. It's the one difference being Rage of Dragons. She loved it, while I did not quite as much, and that is the source of much internal conflict. But Lezlie is so nice. Her channel is The Nerdy Narrative. If you have not checked out her channel, you absolutely need to. Her greeting is, "What up, nerds?"
What up, nerds?
And it used to be she reads everything from fantasy, sci-fi, and horror genres, but now she reads way more than that, like manga and nonfiction and literary fiction and all kinds of other stuff. She reads some of really everything. I think currently, as far as manga is concerned, she's working through Full Metal Alchemist. Before that, it was Tokyo Ghoul, and then my favorite, One Piece. What I really love that Lezlie does is she is constantly trying to highlight indie or self-pubbed authors, and she just does a fantastic job of that. There's so many self-published authors and books that she's already highlighted on her channel, so she gets mad props for doing that. Guys, if you have not checked out Leslie's channel, I urge you, implore you, encourage you to go show Lezlie some love over on her channel, because she is the absolute best, one of the best people I have met since I've been doing BookTube. And so, when trying to find a book that Lezlie loved, I've already done Rage of Dragons, and, you know, I could have done Fires of Vengeance, but I don't think when I picked she quite had a review out for that. And there were some other things, but really, there was a book that I kind of already had wanted to be reading and would definitely not have read it this month if not for this Secret Santa. I absolutely would have found something else to read just because I'm behind on so many other things, but because I know this is the first book in one of Leslie's favorite series, The Faithful and the Fallen, my book is Boosh! Malice by John Gwynne, book 1 in the Faithful and the Fallen series. And I know Lezlie loves this book, I know Lezlie loves this series, and I am going to talk about Malice. So guys, if you have watched my videos before when talking about this, I have kind of left it alone because I don't really love Vikings, and Vikings are kind of like pretty low on my totem pole of like historical peoples as far as like what I think are cool. And everyone told me the greatest lie that has ever been perpetuated, ever, no matter what anybody else says, the greatest lie that's ever been told to the American people is that Malice is not about Vikings. They are lying to you. They are not telling you the truth. It is definitely about Vikings. And you can say it's not about Vikings, but let me explain to you. Every character in this is a big, burly, dark-haired dude. Everyone has a beard. Everyone has a beard. It's cold all the time. Yeah, no one's walking around. His name's not Corbin Thannon's son, but it's Corbin Bell Thannon, which is the same thing. So it's a bunch of Vikings walking around. They all got dark hair except for one guy's got red hair. And they've all got big old beards. And they all live near the coast, and it's freezing all the time, and everyone's rugged. It's like, when I did my Every Book Can't Be Game of Thrones video, this is actually one of the ones that is compared to Game of Thrones. And you know what? In this particular situation, I'm going to say that comparison is pretty apt. In so many ways, Malice is a more rugged, less classy, harsher, more fast-paced, less nuanced Game of Thrones. And that's really good, and also, I mean that in both positive and kind of negative ways. I think the kind of politicking in Game of Thrones is slightly more, you know, cloak and dagger, if you will. But I think it takes a much longer time to get started and set everything up. I think the payoffs that Martin has are worth it, but you have to agonize with like, ooh, piece here, ooh, the spider, ooh, move a piece here, and then Tyrion's like, oh, I'll move a piece over here. Malice, however, is much more interesting, and things happen much more quickly, and there is significantly less navel gazing, and there's significantly less like, oh, hello, random noble. There's less Downton Abbey.
When you give these little people power, it goes to their heads like strong drink.
In Malice, and much more like kind of Wild West. When I roll into the meets the Vikings. And I don't know if that makes any sense, but that is really the general feeling I get here, because it is this world of kings and politicking and backstabbing and betrayal. So Malice, for those of you who don't know, Malice is a book set in what is called the Banished Lands, and it's called the Banished Lands, and I'd heard this before, but I was like, oh, the Banished Lands, really? But it's actually really cool on why it's called the Banished Lands, because the world was created by, there's this very godlike figure and this very devil-like figure. It was weird to see the very like Judeo-Christian God kind of thing, and then like something like analogous to the devil, and there's like angels in their legends and stuff. And so the giants were in this place, and the giants worked together, and then they fought each other, and then they fought over these treasures, and then the god figure came and like scattered them and scourged the world, and then disappeared and kind of, I guess, locked away the devil kind of character, or the devil kind of spirit. And when kind of the humans fled their land, they were banished, they were exiled to this land where the giants were. And that's why it's called the Banished Lands, because they were banished to these lands where the giants were, and they went to war with the giants, and so the giants are less numerous and the humans are much more populous, but there are still giants. And because it's cold, I always think of the giants as frost giants, because I played D&D for forever, and the only kind of giants that appear in cold places are frost giants. So I know they're not blue, but they're blue to me, and I kept expecting like a frost giant Jarl to jump out. I know it's Jarl, but I'm gonna say Jarl because we always did when we played D&D. And there's no Jarls, which makes me sad, but there are giants, and giants kind of feature heavily as one of the mythical creatures on here in the Banished Lands. In addition, in the Banished Lands, we have things like they're called wolven, which are kind of like wolves, but I think they've got like saber-toothed tiger tusks. They're like huge, like saber-toothed wolves, if you will. And then there's things called white worms, which are just these huge white snakes that constantly pop out of the water. In fact, the worms from the Banished Lands really remind me of water weirds. Again, if you've ever played D&D, if you played D&D, you never went near a strange body of water without searching. Ever. Because there's always a water weird. And if you don't know what water weird is, it's just this water elemental thing that lives in like fountains and stuff, or random bodies of water, and it like turns into this big water serpent and like drowns you. And I felt like every time they were going to come near a body of water, there's going to be a freaking worm pop out, because, you know, the worms kind of live in the water. And all of these creatures are kind of stirring where they haven't been before, because there's this great prophecy at the center of this book, to where the agents of Eloin, the god figure, is gonna, he's called the Bright Star, is going to rise up versus the devil figure Asroth, whose champion is going to be the Black Sun. And there's this great prophecy that everyone talks about, and it's going to kind of, something big is going to happen on Midwinter's Eve. And that's really kind of where we start. And Malice has the multi-point of views that was made popular kind of by Martin and the Game of Thrones books. And our main POV characters, the first and main one is this kid named Corbin, who is from one of the kingdoms, Arden. So all the Banished Lands are made up of kingdoms, and each kingdom has a king or a queen. And then there is one main king, the High King, that really isn't, he's not really king of everybody. He kind of is, but isn't. The High King, as a title, hasn't really had authority over all the other kingdoms in, like, you know, hundreds of years. But in title, it's still there. It's technically the king of all the other kings. But Corbin lives in this western domain of Arden, and he's a boy who's trying to train up to become a warrior, and he eventually will, and he lives with his dad, who's a blacksmith. He's the son of a blacksmith, and there's their stable hand, and he's got his sister and his mom, and his storyline is very coming of age, and it's much more common. The structure of the narrative is generally Corbin, different POV character, Corbin, different POV character, Corbin. Rarely it'll do 2 Corbins in a row, or Corbin, then 2 non-Corbin POVs, and then Corbin again. So he's clearly the main character, and his storyline is the standard coming of age. He's a peasant boy. Not quite peasant. I mean, the blacksmith is pretty well respected, and he is going to be something. And he kind of feels like he was meant to do something great, and he has visions, and there's all these, and it's very, Corbin is very obviously from the beginning it feels very much like the chosen one, and Gwynne really plays with that trope there. What's interesting about Corbin's, while I didn't really enjoy his perspective to start with, Gwynne does a really good job making Corbin pretty likable. He doesn't really complain at the things that occur, and many things do happen. He is young, and that does show, and I like that Gwynne shows him as being young and having the same kind of concerns that young kids have. I mean, he's 14, but he's not super whiny. He's not really reluctant to do anything. He believes truth and courage, which is what his dad has told him that will always see him through, truth and courage. And I love characters like that. And everything that, no matter what Corbin goes through, he's really likable. And I think Gwynne just does a fantastic job there, because normally I don't like these, farm boy to chosen one type things, where I don't really like coming of age stories in general. He is far under the median age that I really enjoy for characters, but by the end, I really like Corbin. I'm rooting for Corbin. I'm happy that Corbin is really the main character. And so Gwynne does a fantastic job with that POV. Now, the other main POV is Veritas. And Veritas is older. I think he's 17. One of the main gripes I have with this series is that it's very hard to tell how old anybody is unless he flat out tells you. He tells you that Corbin's 14. He tells you that Veritas is 17. I think one of the other characters, Castell, is 19, and after that, I don't know how old anybody is. He doesn't really explicitly tell you, so it's kind of hard to keep that straight. I'll talk about that in a minute. So Veritas left his home, which is one of the kingdoms that borders the High King's kingdom, and his older brother is just a storied warrior and is super popular, and to get out from under his shadow, he is sent to the High King's court to kind of serve in the High Prince's warband. The High Prince's name is Nethair, and so him and Nethair become close friends, and he's just he ends up becoming the chief, the chief of the warband, the right hand of Nethair's warband, kind of like his first sword type thing. And so they form a really close bond, and I really like Veritas because Veritas is very loyal, and he also stands for kind of justice and loyalty, and wants to root out betrayal. And from his perspective is really interesting because we see Nethair through his perspective, and Nethair, just like Veritas, is kind of overshadowed by his dad, Aquilus, the High King. And he and his dad kind of have different views on. His dad is very conservative about how war should be fought and how war is always fought and what the prophecies mean, but Nethair is much more forward thinker and has some kind of new ideas, and his dad just kind of doesn't want to listen or work with them, or doesn't want to make allies with historical enemies. And so we see Nethair and Veritas kind of struggle against what the High King wants them to do, what his duty as a son is versus his duty as kind of the prince of the realm. And Veritas has to kind of weigh his loyalties versus his loyalties for his friend, his loyalty to his king and his kingdom. And so we get to see, and so that storyline is really interesting as well. Now, some of the other characters that we have POVs from there's a bandit named Camlin. He's kind of our eyes into this bandit band that lives in what's called the Darkwood, which is near Arden, that has been plaguing kind of the lands around the Darkwood for years. So he's our window into there, and I understand why we have to have his perspective, because there's stuff that goes on in the woods that we wouldn't be able to see otherwise. We also have Castell, who is kind of a 19-year-old, who also kind of has a rivalry with his cousin. He is the nephew of one of the other kings that borders the High King's realm. and he doesn't get along with his cousin, and so they have this bitter, fierce rivalry, and his uncle wants them to kind of jointly rule after he's gone, him and his cousin, and so there's a rivalry there, and he ends up, him and his shieldman Marquin, they end up running afoul of some giants, and so their storyline really kind of involves the giants in this huge forest called the Fallen Forest, which has just been plaguing that region for forever. And then the very first chapter, and periodically we see, is a guy named Evnis. And we see his POV sporadically. And what I really liked about what Gwynne did here is Evnis has the very first POV, and from the very first page, we know he's the bad guy. From the very first page, we see him essentially selling his soul to Azeroth, the devil figure, in exchange for power, for control over the lands, for control over Arden and the lands surrounding it. He is also overshadowed by his older brother, who hates him. So he's just this young noble when we first see him, and then the story picks up 14 years later after the first chapter. And so every time we see Evnis, just in any of the POVs, we know he's a bad guy. Like, we know from page 1 that he's a bad guy, and I really like how Gwynne did that, because Evnis could be less interesting than he is if we didn't already know he was the villain. Like, just seeing it and seeing just how, like, he's just the worst every time you see him, and you'd be like, oh, I hate that guy, that guy's clearly the bad guy. Well, Gwynne, rather than having us do that and be like, yeah, that guy's clearly the bad guy, he shows us that he's the bad guy from the start with. And so now we can just kind of follow along and be like, oh no, like everything takes on an extra layer of meaning when he's in the scene, because we're like, oh no, y'all don't do that, don't listen to him, he's the worst, we hate Evnis. And so I really enjoyed what Gwynne did there to kind of play with our expectations. So as I said, there are those tons of rivalries and kind of feeling like you're under people's shadow. There's a lot of that going on, and kind of what your destiny is and how much agency do you really have in these noble families or serving a noble family. How much agency do you have with who you're going to be? How much does prophecy kind of determine who and what you're going to be? What's the credibility of prophecy? And that kind of stuff. And so that stuff is really, really interesting. There is, I think, too much of the rivalry thing where they all kind of started bleeding together. Gwynne uses a lot of similar stuff in here. For example, there's way too many scenes with this bully in Corbin's chapters, this bully named Rafe, him and his dad and his cronies. This guy bullies Corbin in like nearly every other chapter, and no matter how it gets resolved, like, he does it again. Like, even when it's not in his best interest to do so. Like, it happened way too often. If you've read it, like, tell me if you agree. Like, there's way too many Rafe bullying scenes up in there. In addition, another thing that Gwynne likes to do is every chapter either ends or begins with a messenger on horseback. Guys, there are so many messengers flitting in and out of these places, like I don't think anybody ever rests. I don't think anybody ever sits down and watches TV and eats dinner with the family, because everyone is always on horseback bringing a message to one place or another. Now, I know part of that is just the constraint of having to, with the fact that it takes place over this large land mass, and what's going on here in the West in Arden is connected to what's going on in kind of like the central/eastern section in Tenebrae. And so the only way anybody can find out about the haps is by messenger. But that is a device that is used repeatedly. Like, every chapter ends on a freaking messenger showing up and informing of some new thing that is happening. Now, the good thing is the chapters are really short, and this book reads very quickly. So, what I love that Gwynne has done here is this book feels very familiar, very cozy, very traditional, but with Gwynne's own kind of twist on it. So it feels accessible because we felt and kind of seen some of these things before, but not in this way. It feels classic and traditional, but not dense. It is slow, especially the first 350, 400 pages, but not boring. And it is. And that's what really everyone I've talked to about this series has said. Malice is the world building book, the kind of setup book. And there's a lot being set up. And I agree. This book is slow, but not boring. I was never bored reading this book. And that is a key thing right here, is that I've read books where it takes forever to get started, and I'm just bored for that section. I was never bored with what Gwynne was trying to do, even though it was slow. It's not really till over halfway through the book that stuff starts to happen. But let me promise you that once stuff starts to happen, it does not stop happening. If you are not a fan of kind of military fiction or war or soldiering or combat, this is not really the book for you. There's a ton of combat in this book. A ton of combat in this book. And like I said, once the plot gets going, I could not put the book down the last 200 pages. I just couldn't. Like, I stayed up way too late. I woke up way too early just so I could finish it, because it was just so good. The end of this book, the last leg of this book was so good. And all of that buildup was starting to pay off. And it's just kind of left with so many places to go, with so many open-ended things that I hope are going to be covered in the last 3 books. Because let me tell you, when I closed the book on Malice, I immediately wanted to pick up Valor. Fortunately, I don't even own Valor yet. I ordered it and it's going to be here soon. But I cannot wait to get to January and start Valor, because Malice was it just ended so good. Now, a couple of the other things that are kind of like cons. Everyone looks the same. There are too many characters. There are too many characters. And they're not all characters. Like, the ones you see a lot, like, those are kind of fine, but there's a ton of names. And one of the reasons that this is such a brisk read is that Gwynne does not bog us down in description. So everyone kind of looks the same, really, because no one gets any, like, advanced description. Like, everyone's dark-haired with beards. And there are too many names, and other than like the handful that you see a lot, I don't really know these tangential people. There's a lot of names. So many names. So that's a struggle. Another con of the brisk prose is that there's not a lot of description. So sometimes I kind of missed what was happening because stuff happens so fast. This feels a lot like, the setup part feels a lot like Jade War, but less heavy and slow, like much more brisk and like bouncy and slow. And also feels a lot like the Poppy War, where it's just shoving you toward, like you're constantly being propelled. The prose does not really get bogged down, other than those kind of repetitive things I'm talking about, like the bullies and the messages, the constant messages thing. The other thing that he does that people say, huh, a lot. You'll see this a lot. Huh, so-and-so grunted, H-U-H, so-and-so grunted. And it's so weird every time I see that, because when I think huh, when someone says huh, that's them thinking, right? Like, that's what I think when I see huh. They're like, huh. Someone tells you something, you go, huh. As if to acknowledge it, or is that so? That kind of thing. That's not how he means it. He means it just grunting. Like, I don't really know why it just doesn't say grunt, like so-and-so grunted. I don't really need you to spell out the grunt. That's just a weird pet peeve. Like, every time I saw it, I'm like, are they contemplating what he's saying? Or, oh no, he's just grunting. I get it. But it's very brisk, but sometimes you miss things because the prose is so short and businesslike and just really serviceable. It's not flowery at all. Because of that, I sometimes missed kind of some things that were going on, because stuff happens really fast. And just like in the Poppy War, like, large swaths of time sometimes take place not just between chapters, but between like paragraph breaks. Like, there's gaps within the same chapter, and like a month has passed, or 2 10 nights, or 3 moon cycles, as they say. But overall, I think Gwynne has told just a fantastic story here. The character work is really good. He takes these archetypes and these tropes that we're used to seeing and just deviates them enough to keep them fresh and keep them interesting. There is a character arc in this, and I'm not going to say which one it is, but there is a character arc in this, a kind of, one of the plot lines. I just, very early on, felt a large sense of dread. And as I kept reading, I became more and more sure of my dread. And even though I was aware of this dread, because I'm not really good at seeing things coming, I'm still like, oh no, what? No, no, please don't go to, is this where it's going? Oh, is this where it's going? Oh my goodness. And it's just really well done, this character arc, where you look at things completely different than you did earlier on. If you've played Assassin's Creed 3, it's like that. I feel very similar to the difference between seeing some characters at the very beginning of Assassin's Creed 3 versus seeing them a few hours into Assassin's Creed 3. It's kind of like this switch of like, the lens with which you view them switches, and so everything takes on kind of this different kind of tonality. And I thought that was really, really good and really, really well done, and just built to this conclusion that I just couldn't stop reading. And guys, I cannot wait to pick up Valor. So I am so glad that I picked up this book. So glad. Guys, on the King Finn approval system, I give Malice, I'm gonna give this book a superb minus, because I was debating whether this was 4.5 or 5 stars, because there were some things that bothered me, and it was slow for a good time. But as I've been talking to you about it, I've been getting more and more excited, and that to me means it's a 5-star, because I'm so excited to pick it up, and I couldn't stop reading it once I had gotten to that end. So it's a superb minus on the King Finn approval system, because it just barely ekes over into the out of 5 stars, 5-star territory. And if Malice is this good, if the other 3 books stick to that 5-star status, this could be another 4-book 5-star series for me, just like the Greatcoats. So guys, thank you so much for watching. If you have not subscribed to Worldhoppers, you absolutely should. Bunch of us booktubers coming together, talking about books, and all of the AdSense money goes to charity there. If you are not already subscribed to Lezlie over at The Nerdy Narrative, I urge you and encourage you, please go subscribe to her. She is just amazing. I love Lezlie so much. Thank you guys so much for watching. As always, information about my Discord and Patreon are down in the description, and I will see you guys next time.